community, how to be an advocate and an ally for the community. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I first want to start by reading the disclaimer that you all signed when you registered. By registering for this event, I agree to abide by the rules of the League of Women Voters of the United States and the League of Women Voters of Colorado, as set out in each league's bylaws and official policies. I agree to not engage in any behaviors or actions that are harassing, threatening, or physically or verbally abusive toward any League of Women Voter member, employee of League of Women Voters, or member of the public, and not create an environment that is intimidating, hostile, or offensive. This includes online activity. I understand that photos, videos of me may be taken in connection with my participation, and these are the sole property of the league. And I know that's just housekeeping, but it's really important when we're doing presentations like these. Two other items of business. One, the J.E.D.I team is actually taking off the month of May. All of the members have commitments that require our attention, but we are not disappearing. We will be back in June with some great speakers and more presentations. And then finally, we're going to have everybody on mute tonight, but please feel free to ask any question that you feel comfortable in asking in the chat. Don't feel like you have to be on camera or you're going to be having to ask the question publicly. We will go ahead and ask the question. So any question that you want to ask, please just put it into the chat box. And I think that is it for me. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna Yeager, who is going to introduce tonight's speakers.
All right, thank you, Shauna, and welcome everyone. This is great to see everybody. Our leadoff presenter is going to be Mark Lester. Mark is the policy analyst at Rocky Mountain Equality there in Boulder. He believes civic engagement and community advocacy can bring lasting positive change, particularly for historically underrepresented communities. He graduated from CU Boulder with a BA in political science and a certificate in LGBTQ plus studies. He's been working with the Rocky Mountain Equality in policy, advocacy, and community outreach since September 2024. I'll add a few comments of my own. I actually met with Mark in person at their office at Rocky Mountain Equality in Boulder on March 6th. I also had the opportunity to talk briefly with the Chief Executive Officer, Marty Moore. That was great to be able to meet her. I've attended several sessions over the years in the Boulder area that have been sponsored by RMEQ, and before that, I think they're out of Boulder County. I'm really happy to see the great work that they provide to the LGBTQ plus community, and to have Mark here today to talk about advocacy. The title of his presentation is Freedom Takes Action, How We Can Stand with the Trans Community. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Jenna, for that really touching introduction. And also I want to thank you for taking so much initiative in putting this together, to reaching out to our organization and to One Colorado as well, who do incredible work that I'm going to talk about a bit more later. It's just an incredible opportunity to be speaking with you guys, and I will go ahead and share my deck with you in the Zoom now. So please just let me know if you see that. Oh, that's not showing the right thing. Is that it? We're all seeing it?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, just stop me if you see something else. But yeah, so I'm with Rocky Mountain Equality. I'll move my head. Rocky Mountain Equality. There we go. But basically, yeah, my presentation is called Freedom Takes Action. And the reason I decided to call it that is because basically our rights, and the rights particularly of the trans and non-binary community, are currently in a very precarious position, and it takes action to preserve the freedoms that we already have, and to create new freedoms for a free and happy existence for every member of our community. So let me talk a bit more about Rocky Mountain Equality, what our organization's about. So basically, we're kind of a community-based organization. We provide a mix of advocacy and of community-based work and service. We work collaboratively to create connection and provide advocacy, education, research, cultural events, and responsive programs and services. And basically the goal of all of those actions is to ensure that LGBTQ plus people, families, and communities thrive, particularly in the Northern Colorado area that we serve and in the entire state of Colorado. And our long-term vision is to apply this vision to the entire world. We envision LGBTQ plus people, families, and communities living authentically as their true and authentic selves in an inclusive, equitable, and compassionate world. So I want to say thank you again for taking the time to listen to how we have worked to achieve that in Colorado and what some of our challenges are. And you all know, I'm sure you've been following the news, you know we have challenges. It has been a really um, I'll say it lightly, disheartening time. It's been a downright scary time. The new administration in the federal government has taken a number of harmful actions against the transgender community and non-binary community, and that's included seizing federal recognition of gender identities, cracking down on gender affirming care. We felt that impact very hard here in Colorado, and our organization felt that too, because we had to tell families who serve trans youth that their care situation was uncertain, and that was incredibly tough. But um, they've also targeted trans individuals and bans them from military service and in executive orders banning them from sports participation. And beyond that, the administration has also used very dehumanizing rhetoric against the trans community, basically dismissing their validity, their existence. And that's trickled down to the local level too. And I'm sure the League of Women Voters of Colorado has seen that as well. Discriminatory policies have attempted to pass, and some have succeeded in passing in Colorado communities, including banning trans youth from sports participation and only recognizing two biological sexes, ignoring the reality of gender diversity and undermining the trans and non-binary community. So a big message I want to push today, and again, you all are here, so I know that you value this incredibly, but you know that no matter what your identity is, it is a moral imperative to oppose this. And you all are here because you want to learn how to become an effective ally, someone who is effectively opposing what is going on in our state, in our communities, and in our country right now. And how we can navigate and survive a climate that is systematically dismantling the rights and freedoms of trans, non-binary, and or gender expansive people who are living in this country. So I want to first take you through some of the advocacy work that Rocky Mountain Equality has done in the state of Colorado and in our communities, and perhaps how you can participate in that advocacy in your own personal lives and in the work that you do with the League of Women Voters of Colorado. So our signature piece of legislation in the state legislature this year was called Gender Identity Certificate of Death, House Bill 1109. You can see me there. You can tell I've never been to a bill signing before because I'm all excited, but we got that signed into law just last week. It was very cool. And it was very heartening to have a positive change happen in the state of Colorado. Basically, what this bill did is ensured that no Coloradans are misgendered on their death certificates, and it basically does this by recognizing identity documents that record gender identity and factoring those into the death certificate process. And despite anti-trans opposition, this bill was passed into law. And the way this bill originated actually ties into my larger message here. It started with a trans person in our community unfortunately passing away and it being a struggle to have their identity properly recognized. And we had people in our community saying, we don't want this happening to anybody else. And we are proud to have worked for the adoption of a bill that will hopefully make that a reality for Coloradans. Another bill Marty wanted me to talk about, and this is a One Colorado initiative actually, and we testified in favor of it as well, was House Bill 1309, which adds new protections for gender affirming care to the state of Colorado. It will codify protections for gender affirming care and private insurance, making sure that they can't deny coverage for that. And it removes testosterone from prescription drug tracking programs that add stigma to testosterone and basically make it so out-of-state actors could possibly access that data. So that bill was very important to us, and we were fortunate to have been able to testify in support of it. Excuse me. Another bill we testified in support of, and this one also I think speaks to the power of listening to the community that we're trying to serve. This is Senate Bill 276, which adds civil rights protections for undocumented immigrants living in Colorado to state law. And this is one that kind of you might kind of think, hearing that we were active on this, like, well, how does this pertain to the LGBTQ plus community or to the trans community? But when you think about the reality we're living in right now, people feel very unsafe and very insecure in terms of their safety and their security in this country. And this bill is adding civil rights protections to make sure that federal agencies cannot violate the privacy of individuals in the state of Colorado. And that is very important to an LGBTQ plus community and a trans community who is concerned about their identities being compromised. And basically making sure that their rights are upheld is an essential objective for us, and that's why we spoke in support of this bill. Some other highlights from this year: we codified same-sex marriage into law. We added or we testified in favor of trans affirming clauses in the Voting Rights Act that's going through the legislature. And we offered support to 129, which is protecting out-of-state telehealth providers for gender affirming care. Another important ingredient to our advocacy work this year has been opposing anti-transgender legislation, and that has come from one particular side of the aisle. And fortunately, they were not able to pass anti-trans legislation in Colorado this year. The session is still has a couple weeks left, but we're confident that Colorado will continue to uphold the rights of trans people to the extent that they can. But a lot of bills were proposed that would have undermined gender affirming care access and the ability to live freely and in dignity in Colorado. So we were proud to have spoken up in opposition to these pieces of legislation. Another important ingredient to our advocacy this year has been working on the local level, because at the end of the day, our communities is where we feel the impact of things that are going on most directly, perhaps. So our organization plans to engage in school district races in Northern Colorado to ensure that non-binary and trans students are supported and protected. We also continue to engage with our local leaders to ensure that our community is welcomed and supported. And you all maybe have seen that school districts are some of the hottest battlegrounds for trans rights. There are people who unfortunately are against affirming trans students and who they are. So it's important to us to fight to ensure that an equitable world that honors everyone's dignity and the people who they are, that extends to every facet of our society, including our schools. And something you may have noticed that I've been bringing up is elevating the voices of the trans and non-binary communities in advocacy, because really we cannot be effective advocates if we don't hear what people are struggling with and what they're concerned about and what's going on. And I think that kind of really strengthens our legal advocacy, because the programs that we run through our organization help kind of inform what people are dealing with and what people are struggling with. So our organization has a number of programs that are meant to directly impact and help LGBTQ plus people living in Boulder and beyond. And that includes the Boulder County Gender Support Group. We have peer support groups. We have family-oriented groups, youth groups, groups that emphasize queer and trans people of color's experiences, people who are going through recovery. We also offer inclusivity training to businesses and public entities, case management, financial assistance, that statewide advocacy I talked about. We also run the Boulder and Longmont Pride events, and we do a lot of stuff around Trans Awareness Week. We do ballroom events, game nights, a lot of like stuff under the sun that I wouldn't have even expected starting working here is stuff that we've taken part of. And it's been really eye-opening for me as someone who's a policy analyst who spends a lot of their time just kind of putting together research behind a desk. Like I've found that I've learned so much about what the community is dealing with and experiencing just by talking to people who work on these events and work on supporting the community directly. And without that support, I feel like our advocacy would not be nearly as effective. And it's a very strong feeling with Rocky Mountain Equality that providing service is an essential part of our advocacy, because without that service, people ultimately would be worse off. So we are proud to provide that service. And we are also, excuse me, very, very happy that the League of Women Voters again is sponsoring this event, because the work that you all do can go directly towards ensuring that Colorado upholds trans rights. I found a nice passage that I liked from the League of Women Voters website. The League of Women Voters, quote, values our trans and non-binary league members and stands with the trans community. I think that's a very powerful message to be sending in a time when perhaps popular sentiment isn't so much with the trans and non-binary community. But I want to tell you right now that by being an advocate and centering the experiences of your trans friends and family, you can help build a better world for the trans and non-binary community in Colorado. And speaking on kind of a personal note, I have a direct family member who's a member of the trans community, and in terms of seeing all the legislation and everything that's been coming through the pipes, I've had my parents calling me asking me if they should stockpile drugs or if they should consider moving out of the country because of what's happening. And that's been very hard to hear, but it just I can just tell you as someone whose family is directly impacted by what's going on, your work is valuable, your work is important, and as a brother and as a human being, we really appreciate you taking the time and to learn about how you can be better allies. And that's kind of the next segment of my presentation. Kind of how you can ask yourself as an individual, what kind of advocate do I want to be, and how do I be an effective advocate? So something that we kind of use is the 4 A's of advocacy. And that's basically a model that you can use to kind of shape how you think about what kind of advocacy you're doing in your daily life and what you're doing more broadly, perhaps in your community organizing, whether that's with the League of Women Voters or with other groups. Um, so the first example would be an actor, right? An actor is basically a supporter of community efforts. They help raise awareness, generate interest in things that are going on in the community, organizing, whether that be through social media or otherwise, monetary contributions, directing resources to community members. And to go through some specific examples of that, um, let's see. That might look like sharing a post on social media to celebrate a trans rights bill. I mean, it's not too late to post about the death certificate bill if you want to. Want my face on your social media page, you're welcome to. But attending a community pride event for the first time, listening to trans speakers share their story, that goes back to elevating voices, hearing concerns. Um, Wearing a pin or shirt with an inclusive message, sparking conversations with friends or coworkers who notice. And this is something I was very interested about when I heard one of my coworkers talking about it. I was wondering, does wearing a pin really have that much impact? But wearing a pin, perhaps like with your pronouns or saying you support the community, it A, helps people feel safe, but B, also helps spark conversations and help build a more affirming environment over time. Second A in that acronym, allies. Allies are at the forefront of support. They are community members who contribute by volunteering, providing supplies, and working alongside others. Allies do not center their own values over those of the community they are organizing for. That's again a very important point. Being an ally doesn't necessarily mean, advancing your own beliefs. It means advancing the needs and the values of the people who are you're allying with. But it's very much like a forefront type role. And to take you through some specific examples of that, um, teacher creating an inclusive classroom environment, coworker ensuring that trans colleagues are included in discussions, parents advocating for inclusive policies at their child's school. You want to get involved in our school board campaign, there you go. As the policy analyst, I would say call up your state legislators, call up your congresspeople, call up your any representatives at any level of government and say, I stand with the transgender community. I support this bill. I support that bill. And just letting it be known that you are a supporter of trans rights, and that's a very powerful thing to do. And another role that you could take is accomplice. Not necessarily quite on the ally type level, but accomplices are essential leaders in community organizing, focusing efforts on direct action. This one's actually probably the most direct role in terms of doing things. They're community organizers and change makers. This role is not for everyone, but is crucial to community organizing. I personally like to think of myself as kind of an accomplice, and I like kind of the the badass connotation of the word accomplice. But anyway, some examples of that might look like, let's see, volunteering with a grassroots organization like, hey, League of Women Voters of Colorado, Rocky Mountain Equality, One Colorado, to help trans individuals access healthcare, housing, or legal assistance. We'll talk more about direct Rocky Mountain Equality resources later. A local business owner offering free space for trans support groups, collaborating with trans leaders to create sustainable programs. That accomplice part, that's a very important role to fill. Our fourth role that we have outlined, ARCs. This one is kind of the one that's most intriguing to me. Caregivers who focus on holding space for grief, healing, and restoration. We have some coworkers who I feel are kind of like that because realistically doing this work and sometimes just existing as a member of the LGBTQ plus community is incredibly daunting and challenging. So an ARC, someone who's focused on offering support for people, is incredibly important. Some examples, a family member creates a home environment where their trans relative can fully express themselves. And this is something I'm incredibly grateful to have lived in a household that was affirming of my trans family and of myself as a gay man. So I can tell you that's incredibly valuable. Resource fairs, an affirming faith leader. So just kind of offering that kind of support, that space for people to either grieve or to fight or to act, whatever feels needed for the community at a particular time. So you might think of yourself and say, hey, I feel more like an ally, or I feel more like an accomplice, or I feel like an arc and an accomplice, or really any kind of combination of those roles. You're not married to any one of those roles or any specific trait of those roles, but kind of the takeaway I hope you got from going through what different forms of advocacy can look like is that activism can look like a lot of things, and some forms of activism might be right for you and others might not. The kind of important thing is to be conscious of what you're doing in your everyday life to support and listen to our trans non-binary friends and family. So community advocacy cannot happen without you. That's a very important thing I wanted to emphasize before wrapping up this presentation. And I want to go back to that phrase, freedom takes action. Without action, we don't have freedom. We don't have community resources. We don't have advocacy. We don't have anything. So RMEQ would not be the organization it is without the hard work of volunteers and people who care like you. Part of community advocacy is being there for everyone, including you. And if you're interested in any of our organization's services, please explore RockyMountainEquality.org. RMEquality.org is the web address. If you're interested in volunteering, we always love having volunteers as well. We rely on volunteer services to do our work. And if you have a specific policy inquiries or suggestions, please contact mark@rmequality.org. That's my email. And that goes back to the point, we need to hear from our community to have effective advocacy. We need to elevate the voices of our trans and non-binary friends and family in order to be effective advocates and effective allies. So I hope that is a message that you've taken away after listening to this. And if you're interested in more about what Rocky Mountain Equality has to offer, you can either reach me or reach our website. And thank you so much to the League of Women Voters of Colorado for listening. And I look forward to your questions.
Mark, thank you so much. That was really good. My name is Kathy Ebersberger. I'm the chair of the J.E.D.I Task Force. And I'm really glad that you're here today. I think we've had a few programs on trans issues, and the question is always how can we help? And I think you address that very well. I'd like to ask one question to start with, and that's I read in the Orlando Sentinel today, which is a paper from Orlando, Florida, that Colorado is no longer seen as a haven for gender affirming care. And that is, as I understand it, due to the federal government trying to cut off money to hospitals who provide gender affirming care and providers. And I know some providers have resumed care and some have not. Can you give us any idea on how we could advocate to continue gender affirming care for children in Colorado?
Yeah, of course, that's that was an incredibly difficult moment a few months ago when that executive order was issued and we had our Colorado health providers pausing service. And there were trans parents in Colorado and my own parents as well, who are parents of a trans person. They were incredibly devastated by that and were scared. And there was kind of a moment there where we weren't sure if all of the hospitals would capitulate. Fortunately, our Attorney General, Phil Weiser, joined a lawsuit with the state of Washington, basically telling the federal government this order is illegal and unconstitutional. And when that lawsuit happened, basically, they resumed services. So, but to get to kind of your question, it is very tough to absolutely ensure that our healthcare providers will do the right thing. What I would say in terms of what you can do is basically I would call your representatives, not necessarily, and whether that I'm not sure what exactly it looks like in terms of contacting representatives of healthcare institutions, but making sure that your representatives in Congress and the state house know that you support gender affirming care access and want it to continue. And if more people know that it's a life-saving service, then it's easier to protect. But again, just supporting our Attorney General who's fighting to keep this access alive, and supporting everybody who's fighting for it, I think is an essential ingredient. But you're right, it's a very difficult thing to oppose these unlawful executive orders, but just continuing to do that is really the best, I would say, course of action.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sean, I think you have a question from the chat or maybe personally.
Well, there are a couple questions in the chat, but I have a couple personal questions. Which would you like me to do first, Kathy?
Why don't you do one from the chat and one from your personal?
Okay. Mark, one of the questions in the chat is there a Rocky Mountain Equality equivalent group on the Western Slope?
That is a great question. It's been kind of tough to expand advocacy to rural communities. But so I guess Brandy might know about this, but not that I'm personally aware. I know there are community groups everywhere that are, keeping the community, basically creating community. Our organization, I can speak for us, we are trying to serve statewide. I think it's now over 60% of the people that we serve who come from outside of Boulder County. So we're certainly trying to be there for people in the Western Slope as well. But you're right that without that community center presence, it's tougher. So there aren't any specific groups that I'm personally aware of. But Brandy, maybe you know of.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and answer that question. So One Colorado actually has a Western Slope organizer. She has been with the organization for 14 years. And so that's how we're able to do work in a number of the rural communities on the Western Slope. And then Loving Beyond Understanding is a direct services organization that has similar direct service programs like Rocky Mountain Equality that is out there. And then there are a number of like more smaller clubs and different groups that come together and use the Loving Beyond Understanding in the center's location out there, at least like in Grand Junction. And then like Montrose Pride, Delta Pride, they have like their different smaller group programs that provide different activities. But there isn't like a big organization outside of One Colorado's Western Slope organizer.
Yeah, One Colorado is amazing. That's a main takeaway.
Yeah. Brandy, do you think after this program, you could give me a list of contacts in various areas of the states, and you too, Mark, so that I can put it on our website and people will be able to access those, because we have members all over the state as well.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
happy to I always make sure I get permission before sharing it out, and I'll chat with our political director about getting that list to you.
And then my second question is, and this could be for both of you as well. We are going to have a presence at Pride this year. The league will have a booth, and we are specifically in the youth area. And I would love to know from both of you what you think is the best thing we can bring to Pride for that particular group.
Do you want me to answer that now or in my presentation? Because I can
Oh, well, then
definitely
let's
hit on
wait.
that.
Yeah, let's wait.
But like
Let's,
Mark, please feel free to respond.
So how you can serve youth specifically?
yeah, I mean, just because of the area of the Pride Festival that we will be located in, that's probably going to be the main group we encounter. And so we'd love to know how we can reach them best.
Mm-hmm. Um, that might also honestly just be a question that Brandy can address. I don't I again a lot of my day is just sitting behind a computer. I felt like someone who has been 40 since they were 15. So
All right, we'll wait for Brandy's presentation then.
do we want to get to some of the questions from the chat? Because I do see one directed to me in direct messages. That is asking any legal help advocacies. And I can answer that one absolutely. Rocky Mountain Equality, we don't provide direct legal services, but basically what we do is if you are calling our office asking a legal question, we can refer you to law firms that work directly with us to basically, like, we funnel people who are having legal questions to a law firm that supports that specifically does the type of advocacy for the LGBTQ plus community, because there are some common questions that come up for members of the community. We also do have some resources on our website in terms of legal questions, like about changing your gender on Colorado documents, changing your legal name, changing documentation, and some other legal related questions.
Great. I think there's a couple more questions in the chat and they're pretty much general questions. So I wonder if we should move on to Brandy now and then have more time for questions at the end for both of you, if that's okay. I want to thank you for your presentation. It was awesome. Very direct ideas of how we can advocate for the trans community. So thank you, Mark, and thank you for your organization and the work you do.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll kick off here with an intro for Brandy. Oh my God, this has been so good, and it's just given us more context for the previous two sessions that we've had. The first one was kind of a trans 101, and the second one was sort of trans folks in their own voices, and we had two awesome speakers for that. Brandy is the lead field organizing strategist for One Colorado. And of course, One Colorado, she'll talk about it, is the state's leading advocacy organization for LGBTQ plus Coloradans and their families. She's a seasoned strategist with over a decade of experience in grassroots organizing, legislative lobbying, and nonprofit leadership. She has led multi-state efforts that helped secure protections for LGBTQ plus rights, most notably securing Senator Mitt Romney's voice for the Respect for Marriage Act, contributing to its historic bipartisan passage. In her current role with One Colorado, she focuses on expanding statewide engagement efforts that center on building and uplifting marginalized voices within the LGBTQ community, particularly around legislative sessions and election cycles. She's an Army veteran with multiple service medals, including the Iraq Campaign Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, and the Army Commendation Medal. Her work has earned awards such as the United States Attorney Honorable Mention Award and being named a champion of Capitol Pride. On a personal note, this is me talking, I've admired the great work that One Colorado has done over the years and continues to do such great work. Just this year, I attended the legislative kickoff that was kind of meet and greet the legislators at the Champagne Tiger there on Colfax, and then also lobby day at the state capitol, which was pretty empowering. Great. Since the league looks to empower voters and defend democracy, and since our Colorado J.E.D.I task force has a focus on protecting immigrant and trans rights, LGBTQ rights, it's indeed super timely to ask Brandy for an update on all these things. So we're so honored to have her here. Her presentation is Walking with, not ahead, centering trans voices in allyship. Welcome, Brandy.
Thank you for that very lovely personal note, Jenna. I really appreciate it. I am going to share my presentation now for all to see. I'm gonna make sure I get on the right page. Are you all able to see just the presentation, or do you see the notes too?
Just a
Just-
presentation.
It's the
Excellent.
presentation.
Awesome. Well, as you are aware, and as Jenna mentioned, my name is Brandy Hardy. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the lead field organizing strategist, which is a very long title. Essentially just saying like I strategize how we engage with community and ensure that they have the tools, resources, and education and ability to be able to connect with their elected officials and with each other to really create change and impact in Colorado. Oh my goodness, you would think I would know how to like go to the next slide. Sorry. So One Colorado is the state's leading advocacy organization dedicated to advancing equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer Coloradans and their families. One of the cool things about One Colorado and how we are able to accomplish this is that we are a C3, we are a C4, and we also have a PAC. So what that means is that we have the ability to provide educational programs. We have the ability to lobby, and we have the ability to endorse candidates who are running for office and be able to direct community members on how we would like them to vote either for the candidates, and it also allows us to run campaigns. As you're aware, we worked closely with the Protect for Marriage campaign last year, and that is because we are a C4 as well as a C3. Also, just backing up a little bit about our programmings. One of the things that also makes One Colorado a little different from other organizations like Rocky Mountain Equality is that we do not provide any sort of direct services or direct service group activities or programming. And so what we focus on within our programmings is really around predominantly community engagement and policy work. And so we have our political organizing and policy team. For short, we call ourselves the POP team. It's a lot more fun. We have our health equity team. Our health equity team works directly with healthcare providers, providing them trainings, education resources, and especially right now, they are very, very busy in the landscape of federal and state nuance language. And then we have our youth in schools team that is underneath our health equity. They work directly with school providers as well as youth. They have a leadership youth council that helps advise our programming and keeps us in the know of what's happening throughout the state of Colorado on a school board, school-based level. We also have a GSA, a statewide GSA program through that leadership program, through Leadership Council. And then we have our development team who helps fundraise. You cannot do what we do. And I know Mark can attest to this, like nonprofits like ours, we cannot do the work that we do efficiently if we do not have funds. And so it is really important for us to not only get in front of community members and say, here are resources and educational programs, but also we go out and ask for donations, whether that is through corporate donations, grant funding. One Colorado does not currently take any federal funding, so we have not been impacted by some of the executive orders, fortunately. But we really strive to have a small donor base that are monthly donors, and so that is how we keep our programs alive. So today I'm going to do a little bit of a different presentation from Mark, and thank goodness, because that was so thorough with the like policies and the bills going through. I was like, yes, I don't have to talk about those one day. I will take that. Today I'm going to talk to you all about what you can do through the Transforming the Narrative project, to be a stronger ally and to be a stronger advocate in the space that you hold. Everyone on this call, everyone in this meeting has a platform of privilege, and it looks different from each other, but we all stand in a position to not only elevate our own voices, but elevate the voices that are being continuously attacked and marginalized. And that's what I'm here to do today. One Colorado has created the Transforming Narrative Project because we recognize that a lot of people have questions around how do we talk about trans people if we are not trans? How do we talk about trans related issues and policies? And how do we confront bigots? And, whether it's a neighbor or a relative and you're at a Thanksgiving dinner and you don't want to listen to another rant at the table, how do you address that? And then also, how do you go beyond your inner circles and really start using your stories, your personal stories and experiences to change and influence legislative policies, to change and influence people's votes. And so today's agenda is a little bit about that, the importance of storytelling and trans allyship, crafting a powerful personal story and putting it into action. And these are some tools that you will be able to use at Pride when you are in the youth section. So why we think transforming the narrative is really important and how it has been proven to be really powerful. So we developed this program based off the gender, race, class narrative, which is a research study that has been put out that was studied and developed so that people understand the intersectionalities of our communities, of marginalized communities, and how to have the most impact. And really what the result is to empower trans leaders, community partners, elected officials, media of all forms, and allies across Colorado to share authentic stories, advocate for change, and build a stronger, more connected movement for trans equality. And we are all part of what that movement is. Although I'm queer, I am not trans, and I always want to make sure that people understand that when I'm speaking about trans related issues, I'm not speaking for the trans and non-binary community. I am speaking from the position that I hold, not only in my role, but in society, being a white queer person. So a little bit of what that looks like. So we like to use the One Colorado's roadmap to trans liberation. And this is really how we navigate our engagement with the community. So we are all living in an experience of different various levels of freedom, and lived in legislative freedom for all is ultimately what we want to accomplish, but we have to start here. Starting with the race, class, gender framework training. This is where our Transforming the Narrative program initially started, and what we're currently doing with legislators. So educating legislators is really important because they are elected by their constituents. We are seeing, obviously, on a national level, how money is influencing races, but also we can look at Wisconsin as a prime example that money isn't guaranteeing like the evidence of buying elections. So although it feels like we're getting close to authoritarianism and that we are getting close to feeling that our votes truly are not mattering, we can look at the Wisconsin Supreme Court race and see that like money actually still does not officially buy our elections. And that's why it's really important to educate our legislators. So something that One Colorado has been doing since May is really educating on the issues and the barriers that the trans community still faces here in the state of Colorado. We've also provided educational tools on how legislators can actually speak about the trans community if they are not trans, and from the point of position that they hold. As lawmakers, they see a lot of bills that aren't just necessarily specific to the trans community. And so it's our responsibility to be able to go in and educate them on what One Colorado and Rocky Mountain Equality, organizations like ours are hearing from community members. And then, for example, the League of Women Voters, I have seen a number of you providing testimony in committee hearings on your position and why you hold that position. And that's another form of educating legislators. The other part of educating legislators is mobilizing our community base, bringing in real stories from impacted communities, whether they're trans members, whether they're family members, whether they're friends of people who are like friends of trans and non-binary folks, and providing opportunities for them to present their stories so that they're also educating legislators on what like a full scale impact is if they choose to support or reject legislation that is harmful or protective of the trans community. The other part of our roadmap to trans liberation is connecting with the trans community members with their representatives. So one of the ways that we have been able to do this is through organizations like yours. When we come into these spaces, you have invited us to provide a perspective. And sometimes there might be people who are trans in the room and in the space right now, or it's someone like you who is going to take the information that you have learned and you take that back to your trans family member, friends, community members, and help them navigate what that looks like. Connecting people with representatives can look a little different from state to state, in my experience. And there are some traditional ways, right? Letter writing or postcard writing, calling your legislators, which is becoming a little more tricky because not everyone has offices anymore. But the most impactful is still the face-to-face interactions and meetings. And one of the ways that we do that at One Colorado is because we do have strong relationships with a lot of lawmakers and community members, we really push, we use that power and privilege that we hold to push for those one-on-one meetings. And I know that I've seen Marty have those one-on-one conversations with lawmakers and has brought community members that are affiliated with Rocky Mountain Equality and has made sure that those individuals are placed in front of lawmakers in the hallways of the Capitol. And that's really, really powerful. And that's also a way that you all can share your story as Capitol building is public and it is ours. And so we are always welcome in those spaces, and we always have the ability to stop lawmakers in the hallway to have a quick conversation with them. And I always strongly believe that we should do that. Another step of our trans liberation is educating journalists and media outlets. We have all probably seen an article or two where we're reading it and we're like, that the way they wrote that story is really peculiar, or it feels like they were really missing some information, or maybe the journalist, when what you're reading, that article feels like there was misinformation, or maybe they lacked some resources that you would have liked to seen in that article because you know that it reaches mass media. Educating journalists is really important in upholding the integrity of the trans community. When we are not holding our journalists accountable, if you're reading an article and you know that they've misquoted someone or that there is misinformation being presented in the article, it is our responsibility as individuals, not just organizations, but like as individuals like Brandy or Jenna or Mark, to reach out to those establishments and call them out on it and ask for a rebuke and ask for them to actually write a correction. And that is the power that we hold as community members and as allies to be able to do, so that we're not putting that responsibility again on a marginalized community. And then bringing trans leaders together from across the state. I will expand on this because obviously we want trans leaders to be brought together. At One Colorado, we see a lot of value in bringing all leaders, all progressive leaders together in spaces. And this can be really challenging because not everyone approaches issues in the same perspective or way, and that can sometimes create conflict or disagreement. And there's always a time and place for healthy debate for that to occur amongst organizations and coalitions. But at the end of the day, we all are trying to achieve, liberation for a marginalized community. And sometimes we have to set aside personal feelings or personal ideas on how a conversation needs to be approached. And so this is why it's so important that there are spaces like this where we're bringing in each other's organizations for information and education and solidarity. Sorry, I forgot all the like red dots. So why storytelling? Research has shown that connection to emotion and building empathy is a key part of changing hearts and minds, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. I don't know if this is true for you all, but I would love all of you to just like take a moment and think, how many times have I heard a conversation and it's inundated with data and you feel like you're just seeing, space behind the eyes? And I see Shauna like nodding her head like, yes, yes. Like, I think we have all been in those conversations, or we have been on the receiving end of that conversation where you're like, if I hear another percentage point, I'm going to actually unmute and scream at the top of my lungs. And the reason being is that data doesn't actually have a lot of influence. Data should never be the leading part of a story, especially your own story. Data is there for support. Data is there for a really specific group of like audience. And so when we think about storytelling, we think about how our experiences are going to impact those around us. And storytelling at its core is connection. And Shauna, I love that you brought up the question about how can we engage at Pride? And because I think that's such a like as simple of a question it's really profound. Because if we look at voter engagement over the last couple of years, we've seen a trickle down and losing younger voters over and over again because they're tired of the antics between, a two-party system. They feel overwhelmed. There is no longer civics in public school spaces. I can't speak for private, but we know that they actually do not come from schooling backgrounds that give them the ability to make informed decisions. And so that responsibility is placed on organizations like the League of Women Voters. And I will say this, I have worked with the League of Women Voters in all 9 states that I have worked in because of your ability and mission to engage with voters and get them registered and informed on a level that is top notch. And so your organization is critical in this type of work. And so when thinking about where you're going to be in the space of Pride this year, I want you to think of the first thing is Pride is about resistance and joy. And so when you're thinking about your story and you're thinking about your engagement, start there. Because if you're leading with everything's on fire and you have to vote to change it, it is not going to go well. So starting with like understanding where the LGBTQ plus community started from, right? Like a lot of people know about Stonewall, and that's where like we really exploded. But the reality is that LGBTQ plus rights have been going on since the 40s. There were different chapters in New York and San Francisco that actually started, that came together, that they were able to develop more of the national like platform for this. And understanding also that the civil rights movement for Martin Luther King, all of the strategies, all of the tactics were from 2 Black gay men. Rustin Bayard, and James Baldwin. And the people who started Stonewall and like that explosion of liberation were two trans women of color. And so it's really important that when you are talking to the youth, that you are building in that intergenerational piece, because if you don't know your history, you can't understand the importance of our future. The other part I will say is swag. I don't know what y'all have. I don't know if you have some free buttons that you can put out, but people love buttons at Pride. And that is just has nothing to do with storytelling, but I just want to give you that tip. Because that is that is something we do. And then also having an activity. So one of the things, or a couple things that I have seen in Rocky Mountain, I've seen this actually at one of your tables, is like a spin wheel. And a way for you to engage and hold the attention of youth or people going past is having a spin wheel, making sure that you have candy or small like giveaway prizes. But it would be really smart strategy and a really smart tactic for you to do a spin wheel on voter information. And this is a way for you to capture their attention and ask the questions that are open-ended versus like, are you registered to vote? Yes or no? Making those questions on the spin wheel open-ended and still connecting it to LGBTQ plus history and voter history is really important. And thinking about, in 1924, that's when Indigenous folks were recognized as US citizens, but they didn't get their voting rights until many decades later. Women's rights. And so looking at the vote, like the history of voter rights, allows folks again to see how the LGBTQ plus community in the different identities have been blocked from being able to practice their own right to vote. And looking at the SAVE Act right now, if that moves through, what does that mean for the future? And then how are you weaving your story into that? We like to say crafting a personal story, you use the 3 V's: vision, values, and villain. With the vision, the reason why we talk about history at One Colorado and why it's really important for you to talk about your experiences is because your experiences come from the past and sit within the present. And that present is what allows you to really share your values around why it's important to you to have trans community be a part of like our entire community. And so being able to identify like what that looks like for you, bringing people to the present and helping them understand like what your values and what you as a League of Women Voters organization and as an individual sets us up for success for the vision. I'll go over some values here shortly, but identifying the villain. We all know there is a villain. We all know that there's actually a blueprint called Project 2025 that is a villain. We know that there are people who are signing it in. For the League of Women Voters, I know that because you're nonpartisan, your tactic and approach has to be a little more nuanced than One Colorado, where we're like, this person's a terrible person. This is my C4 side speaking. But on the C3 side, we do also have to be really nuanced in the way that we talk about things. And that's when you get to lean on to the legislation that has been passed or killed here in Colorado. And Mark did a really great job actually identifying like the really strong positive pieces, like House Bill 1309, that is going to codify gender affirming care in Colorado, making it like still making sure that Colorado is a shield state, still making sure that Colorado is the #1 leading state in the nation, which we are currently, even over California and New York. And so that can also play into our values. Like when we talk about values, that can range for everyone. And like I said, I will speak to this a little more, but those values should always be like your personal values should always be tying in the solidarity and unifying shared visions for the future. And this is what allows you to lead into a call to action to, again, whether it is your relatives at the kitchen table or your community that you're saying, we need to do this. I do want to like just mention again, identifying the value or identifying the villain. We have to say their name. We have to say who is behind this, these attacks, who is funding these attacks. I'm going to give an example. When we were sitting in a number of the anti-trans bill hearings this ledge session, the last couple months, the POP team recognized there were some really interesting phrases that were continuously being said by these individual speakers who were speaking on behalf of themselves. And we were so curious by who these individuals are that we looked them up. We have a research op that we sent them over to, and we're like, who is this person? And there were a few folks that identified an organization that they were with, so we looked them up. And the organizations that they represented are organizations we had never heard of. Their websites were incredibly generic to the point where it looked like a storefront. And we discovered that there were at least 4 of the experts and doctors. None of them were actual doctors except one who was a doctor of geology or something like that, actually wasn't even healthcare related. And we found out that they were being paid by organizations like the Heritage Foundation a very healthy lump sum of money to go around to different states and provide testimony in support of these anti-trans bills. One of the doctors, or there was another doctor, he was a dermatologist. He was paid a lump sum of $40,000 to provide testimony for 2025 legislation. So when we're talking about identify the villain, we have to name it. We have to name their motives, and we have to identify like how they are connected to these bad actors and how they not only are trying to take the rights of trans folks, but how that connects to taking away the rights of women, how it takes taking away the rights of people of color, immigrants, minority religions, and disabled communities. And so when I think like for you all, it does put you in a position that as an organization and as individuals, you really have to reflect on how you're going to be able to do that in the space that you hold and in a way that is impactful. Because again, the League of Women Voters is very credible on a national and local level, and you hold a platform that by identifying these villains, like you are going to have the ear of folks that like myself, my colleagues who are predominantly trans, I mainly work with trans folks, may not be able to be in those rooms and in those spaces or hold those ears and attention. So Mark did speak to this a little bit about crafting your story arc, but I want to break it down and kind of these 4 bullets set up. It's really important that we decenter ourselves from the narrative, from the trans narrative. If we are not trans, we do not get to speak to the trans experience, period. That's it. Like, we do not get to speak about trans people's experiences, but we do get to speak about our experiences and our values around the trans community. And so what I mean by decentering yourself, that's the same in, I'll use this example. When speaking about a community of color, it is not the best approach to be like, I can't be racist, I have a Black cousin. That is not decentralizing yourself from the narrative. You are putting yourself there in a forced lens of allyship that actually does not prove anything. So by decentering yourself, by admitting that you're not trans, by acknowledging that just because you may know someone or you have a relative, that you're still not the one who is the expert in this topic, and that when you're decentering, it's really best practice and really sound practice to make sure that you're going out and engaging with the trans community in a really authentic way. So that you can also ask them, like down the road when you have strong rapport, how would you feel about tabling at the League of Women Voter for Pride this year? Because we're really looking for a way that we have not been able to really finesse to be able to speak to the youth in a manner that we think is going to be helpful for them, especially trans youth, helpful for them to understand like why it's so important to vote and what power they hold. And another thing of like how you can be a trans voter in the state of Colorado and providing them the information and resources, which One Colorado does have a page and we update it every year, on what that looks like for trans and non-binary voters. Build up, get their attention. Like your story is your story, and there's always something interesting in everyone's story. Even if it feels mundane to you, it is going to be interesting to someone else. Make sure you build that in. And resolution, what did you learn in reflecting about your own personal experience within allyship of the trans community? And how are you helping others understand the importance of that reflection, tying that into shared values? And then a call to action. You should never share your experience, never share your story without having an expectation to the audience that you are speaking to. And that can be, again, from the relative that you are speaking to at the table. And that call to action could be, I want you to read this, or you don't need to say that. And it can be as simple as that. I'm going to use an example. I was in DC 2 weeks ago at a conference, and there was a person who felt it was appropriate to apparently start up a conversation about their thoughts and feelings about trans athletes, and in sports. I don't know why they felt it was appropriate to bring up this conversation to me in the manner that they did. The only information they had about me is that I worked for an organization in Colorado called One Colorado that did, LGBTQ plus advocacy work. During this conversation, this individual parroted a lot of conservative talking points that I have heard in all 9 states that I have worked in. And they were really offensive statements. And I finally, I tried to give them a few outs to leave the conversation because I did not know this person. We were sitting with 8 other people at a table that I did not know those individuals either. And so I was trying to be very mindful on how to exit this conversation. And so at one point, like when it was apparent and clear that they were not willing to disengage with me, I let them know that they need to educate themselves. And because they're like, anything that I'm going to say is going to make you mad. I said, I'm not mad. I'm annoyed with you because you're just parroting talking points that I've heard in conservative spaces, which shows me that you have not engaged with a trans person. You don't know a trans athlete, and that you are misrepresenting what this legislation, what people are trying to do, and that's make discrimination legal through the forms of legislation. And they're like, well, how would you recommend that I approach this conversation? And I said, you don't. You are not the person to hold this conversation, and this is not an appropriate space to hold this conversation. And until you educate yourself in a more formidable way, you shouldn't be holding this conversation or bringing it up. And that's it. Like, you do not have to explain your reasoning for standing up for trans people. Period, point blank, end of story. And I think like one thing that we have been trained in society, especially as white people, is that we have to justify ourselves in a lot of ways, as well as many marginalized communities. Is like, if you're a person of color, they have to justify themselves. If you're trans, they have to justify their existence. And no, they don't. And neither do we when we are standing next to them and saying, this is an inappropriate conversation. You don't need to be talking about this community. You don't represent this community, and you obviously don't have the best interest for this community. It is okay to be pointed, it is okay to be direct, and it is okay to be firm. And so that can be a part of a call to action. For the League of Women Voter as an organization, your call to action can be to vote and get the resources and information to the trans voters, because a lot of times, and what I have learned in this space, is that trans folks don't vote because they don't feel safe or they don't know how to. And so that's really a way for you all to use a call to action on an organizational level. I love this statement. I was thinking about this like over and over again, because sometimes there's the performative allyship that feels really icky. And then there's the allyship where you're still learning and you don't know sometimes like if you're asking the right questions or the wrong questions. But at the end of the day, true allyship means showing up, not just in moments of celebration, but in the quiet, hard choices that make a lifetime of difference. And sometimes that means that you have to make a decision that a lot of people are going to disagree, that you could be bullied for, that people are going to be really, really mad at you for. And we know this at One Colorado, because we make these hard decisions, both privately and publicly, all the time. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen that and recently. But being an ally is believing in the right that trans people exist fully and deserve to thrive and be seen just like cisgender folks. Trans allyship isn't about having all the answers, it's about standing beside them, fighting with them, and making space for them as to be their whole authentic selves. I want to share this 30-second video before jumping into some of like my final slide around some shared values.
71% of Americans say that they've never met a trans person. Here I am. I'm a student studying performing arts and fashion design. I love everything about art and creating things. I'm also trans.
When Nadia came out in her transition, I was very unfamiliar with the whole process. I knew that for me to keep her in my life, I needed to be able to change. I needed to be able to learn. There's a lot of hate and there's a lot of people out there that just want families like ours to fail.
What's at stake right now are people's lives. I want to be happy. I want to be healthy. I want to have people by my side that will always be there for me.
I'm just so proud of who she is, who she's going to become.
I love you. We all have the right to be ourselves without fear. Help us share our story. 71% of Americans think
Oh, I don't know how to change the slide now for this. Give me 1 second. Oh, there we go. Okay. So these are some questions like we don't have to discuss right now, but I want you to kind of like reflect on. You know, what relatable values did this video invoke in you? You know, like, are you a parent? Are you a relative? And you're like, oh yeah, I have seen a lot of hate, or I really do feel uncertain still about this. Like, what emotions came up for you when watching this video? And how does this video share and comparing, like, if someone were to just share facts about gender affirming care in youth, would you feel like that data would be as impactful as seeing this story from this individual? Kind of going back to putting your story to work, call to action, these are kind of the things that you should be thinking about. What do you want your audience to do with the information that you're sharing with them? Call to action should be accessible and feel doable for everyone. So again, if you're saying share these resources out with trans voters, like, is this doable? Are you making it doable? Are you sharing it through websites, social medias, links, in person and pamphlets? And then tie it back to what your main takeaway is for that audience. And that's where you loop it back around to your personal story. That's where, like, starting with your story and why this is really important and how it creates change, and that call to action can like evolve into connecting and reconnecting back to your personal experience. And these are just some examples through voting, visible allyship, educating others, watched different documentaries, read a book. It says this because this is from another slide, but we have a ton of resources, like different documentaries that I know that a Queer Endeavor is currently sharing right now. It's about LGBTQ plus students, and you can actually purchase it and share it with as an organization or as an individual. There are a surplus of reading materials that are out there, and then different educators, and then advocacy, sharing your testimony, showing up at protest if you're allowed to do that. And then also getting involved in the election process when organizations are doing GOTV efforts. Oh, I accidentally deleted my values slide, but one of the things I do want to hit on that was brought up, I think, in one of the chats or one of the questions is that And Mark did answer this a little bit about engaging with your legislators and like reaching out to them by phone. And then there was a question about school boards or the like, what can we do around this? Show up. Like, so one of the things that we do at One Colorado is we don't get involved in, we literally don't have the capacity to be at every school board or address every school board. So when we're notified, we do share that information out with our organizational partners if it is in their region or district. And then we do a call to action to our One Colorado members that are specifically in that school district to tell them this is happening, this is the meeting, this is why they're having it, show up. And this has been a way that we've been able to mobilize folks and keep our partner orgs informed about what we're being told in different areas. And so that's a way that you can get involved in that sense. And then around healthcare, you may not be able, it does not make sense for you to reach out to providers and tell them how upset you are with them. We should be reaching out to providers and just telling them how grateful we are for them to be providing the care that they are providing. I know that there are some organizations, and Mark, you might be able to speak to this more, that have started letter writing campaigns to providers. And this is because they are being inundated with threats, like personal family threats, federal threats, state threats. And so it's really important that we do not attack those who are actually the ones in allies spaces alongside us. What you can do is hospitals have boards. And you can find out who that board is, board of directors, and you can reach out to the board of directors and you can tell them how dissatisfied you are with them stopping care or that they've been really, silent on things. What I will say to that as well is like, when you're reaching out to your board, you should always have a specific ask. Sending rant emails it's ineffective and a waste of your time and their time. You should be asking them to do something. I will also say that with healthcare institutions, we are probably going to continue seeing them become a little more quiet in their public spaces, but that doesn't always mean that they are not serving the trans community. They are doing it in a more thoughtful way so that they can protect their own identities as well as the trans patients' identities. Something that we do at One Colorado is we actually have a list of providers that is private, and that when families or individuals are looking for healthcare providers, and they come to us, we do provide them with resources that make sense for them to have. So connecting them with insurance providers or healthcare providers, therapists, things like that. And then same with Rocky Mountain Equality. When we do get legal requests, we do have certain legal experts that we work with that we direct them to. So beyond that, the only other slide I had was, and I can share really quickly, is just my contact information, and any sort of questions that you may have. This is my personal email address, and you are welcome to reach out to me. And then these are our social media platforms that we have. Otherwise, thank you all so much for allowing One Colorado and myself to be in this space with you. And I am happy to yield my time for questions.
Really, that was great. I made so many notes. I'll have to go back through this and really, I know there's a lot of things I want to get back to you on, especially like the gender, race, class training. Is that something that's available to the
Yeah, so we
league?
actually
Or-
provide that training in like a whole, like full on, I think it's usually like an hour and a half, like sort of training that we do.
Is that something that would be appropriate for league members, or I'm
Yeah.
thinking about a
We
future?
talk a lot about like solidarity, but yes, that training is for community members of all identities.
Yeah, because we're the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, so we plan to branch out into other DEI areas in the future. So that's something that's really interesting to me. One of the things you mentioned was that you train legislators about how to speak about the trans community if they're not trans. I think that's something that we could really use help with. Could you give us an idea of maybe um, some of those methods, and also if you think that that would be a good future topic for our meetings?
Yeah, so and I would love Mark to be able to jump in as well, but one of the tactics that we do with legislators is we actually help craft up talking points around different legislation that we are supporting or opposing. And we not only provide those talking points on like, here, this is how you should talk about it, but we really like walk the lawmakers through of like, this is why you need to talk about it in this way. And what we have found by doing that is that we then are building stronger relationships with our legislators, but they're also genuine. I have found that most legislators genuinely want to know this information. And so then we, like end up filtering any sort of questions that we get, whether they're sent to us by phone or email or just being stopped in the hallways. I think that any anything that we do in advocacy spaces should be very mindful of how we're being inclusive with our language. And so your question of like, should we? Yes, the answer is going to be yes of whatever you're about to ask, because if we're not the ones who are setting that expectation for our audience and our peers, who's going to set that? We are then placing that on one of the marginalized communities, and that is not their responsibility to do or to explain their communities or experiences. Like, that is our responsibility to make sure that, like, if we have a platform, that we're using it in a way that is helping elevate those voices, and that we are elevating visibility and then stepping aside when we no longer have to be the one being a placeholder. Like I always say, I'm a placeholder um, in certain spaces that I can access that trans people cannot right now. And one day I hope that I no longer have to be that placeholder. And what that means is that one day I hope that trans people are in spaces that we are in. Like I had someone bring this up, one of our interns brought this up, and I thought it was like really fascinating the way they said this, but they were like, I'm really tired of hearing organizations and community partners talk about like we need to create LGBTQ plus safe spaces. Why can't all spaces be safe enough for us just to exist in them? And so that is why I think like inclusive language and challenging like our own belief systems and reflecting on the materials that we're sharing out with our members, our volunteers, our staff, and our audiences is so important.
Yes, I agree, and I think that it's not only important that we know how to talk to legislators on trans issues and have talking points that way, but I think we need practice in how to talk to people who don't agree with us about trans issues.
Yes.
Um,
Role play, role
you know,
play, role
Role
play.
play, yeah, and I think that would be really good. We don't have a lot of time for questions yet, but actually, there are a few in the chat that I wanted to get to. One was the CHSAA letter. And this is for both you and Mark. How do we push back? How do we push back on that school board letter that, not a school board, but a committee of school board members has proposed to ban LGBTQ students in school sports?
So I'll just be really quick. Mobilize your base to reach out to the school board, like the state school board. And then also we have CADA, and we do have curriculum protected in statute. And I think it's really important for organizations to educate their members and volunteers of like, this is protected. And executive orders are not law. They are intentionally creating chaos, but it is really important that organizations, institutions, establishments are not just folding under. And we saw that with the hospitals, right? And so I think like calling them out and saying like, this isn't law. You're violating Colorado law is a tactic that you can use, but making sure that before you do that, you educate your base on like what actually is in law.
Okay, what is kata?
Yeah. Colorado, someone else answered in chat actually, Colorado High School Sports Association, and that letter, that's something that we looked at as well. And I think Brandy's answer is very on the nose, just like engaging your community, also engaging your school boards. Again, that's one of the most underrated but valuable avenues for change is the school boards. But we do have protections here in Colorado that make sure that that a bunch of people complaining doesn't have the force of law. And nor does a petulant tyrant in the White House complaining either. But we have those protections in Colorado, and but school boards have been passing destructive, not inclusive policies. And one of the people who signed onto that letter is in a school district that we're targeting for change in 2025 in Thompson, which is I think right near Fort Collins. Um, but yeah, just engaging your communities and standing up in opposition is really the most important thing to do, I think, in response to stuff like this.
Can you give me an idea where it is in Colorado law? Like where would I look?
So
Is there a statute name or?
yeah, so CADA stands for the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, and
Okay.
there have been several amendments to that over the years that have included sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression into specific um, protected identities in the state of Colorado against discrimination. And that is kind of the legal sort of foundation for a lot of what Colorado has protect gender law. And obviously that's not all encompassing. We still need to fight for some specific legal um changes, but CADA protects a lot, and in terms of daily life, public accommodations, it makes sure that people can't be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
That sounds great. Thank you. Shauna, do you have any other questions in the chat? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. There was a couple. There was one looking for resources for trans people over the age of 50.
Sorry, I was trying to find the bills to answer your other question. So that one is tricky, I will admit that. I know of different groups, but Mark, you might be able to speak to this a little more so around like programming and resources. Um, I know that AARP is like a national organization that has local chapters, and I know there's a local chapter here in Colorado because I've presented at different establishments that everyone was over the age of 50 and they are associated with it. But that's the only one that I am familiar with having a chapter. I am always happy to reach out to some connections and see if they would be able to give me like more information. But Mark, do you have more information?
Yeah, sorry, someone just dropped something on the floor above me, but yeah, no, Rocky Mountain Equality has 50 plus programming. I think I might have mentioned it in my presentation. There was a game night thing that we do to bring together 50 plus LGBTQ plus community members, but in terms of like a specific advocacy type thing, target oriented towards older LGBTQ plus community members, I don't believe I know of anything particular that. We do have initiatives again to build community for 50 plus LGBTQ plus people, but we're also very attuned to trying to hear what that community needs, especially since Marty herself is 50 plus member of the community. But I'd love to hear more about like what those specific needs are if you want to reach us at Rocky Mountain Equality, because obviously beyond just community programming, it's very important that we address the specific legislative needs of older LGBTQ plus people.
Yeah, I saw a comment in the chat and I was about to say the same thing. The Center on Colfax actually does have, I think it's called the SAGE program. And I think they do a lot of, support for, those over 50. I'm not sure how much that gets into the political realm, if it's mostly social and other things or
Yeah,
not,
they're
but the Center on
strictly
Colfax and
free.
they're the sponsors of the, of Denver Pride as well.
Yeah, they don't get involved in the political side at all. They are
Okay.
like strictly like direct service programming.
In terms of
Thank
direct
you.
service, they are an incredible resource, and I recommend checking them out if you're around the Denver area.
Well, you guys, this has been fantastic, and we've already gone half an hour over our scheduled time. I hope you guys didn't have anything planned. But we would really like to thank you. We've had a great response.
Thank you.
There's further people thanking you in the chat, so I'll leave the chat open for some time so you can take a look at it. Thank you for giving us a blueprint of how we can help support and be allies and advocates. Great tips, and we'll go through it, and hopefully we can have some other programs funneling out of this. So thank you. This has been awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
So much
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
us. What I said about local engagement, we're still very much interested in working with this organization. You guys do incredible work. And I want to thank you so much, A, for having us, and B, for continuing doing the incredible work you're doing, both standing with the trans community and for in general just promoting democracy in Colorado and helping us build a better, more free state. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you've given us tools so we can do it better. So thank you. So Brandy, I think I've got permission to move on 1312 to amend, but I have to check out one more thing. I'm not positive yet, but it's looking good right now.
Excellent. We can
So I
chat
should have an
more
email.
about that offline.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then also I saw a question about sharing slides. One Colorado does not. We just are really taking our information and safety and security that's being put out there very seriously. And so I don't want that to upset anyone, but we are putting together just kind of like general resource pages based off of our slides. And you can reach out to me that way. But we just are acutely aware of how watched we are. And unfortunately, we don't have the leisure to put our information, even if it's training information out there publicly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know the environment these days is pretty endless.
But thank you all so much. If my email is in there, and I'm just really, really grateful to continue working with y'all. You'll continue seeing me in many spaces. And so
Thank you.
Randy.
yeah.
Thank you
Bye.
both. Thanks to all.
Bye.
Bye.